then I would just like to, of course, warmly welcome the speakers of today. We have three, and we have two of our Antwerp Management School faculty members, professors, Geert and Steven. So we have Professor Geert Schijpers, who is an expert in strategy, management control, and performance management. And then we have right next to that, Professor Steven Poelmans, expert in organizational behavior and leadership. Welcome, Geert and Steven. And then we also welcome our panelist, Mr. Boudewijn van der Kelen, who is CEO at Brouwerij Haagt, Belgian brewery, and he is joining us for a discussion with our speakers, Geert and Steven, today. So that's it. I think, Geert, that you are the first one to kick off, so I happily hand over to you. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Eline, for your nice introduction. And also thank you very much, Boudewijn, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to teach together with Steven, and together we run the business strategy and leadership course here at Antwerp Management School. We do that for quite some time now. I think we do this for 4 years now, building on advanced strategy management and on organizational performance management. It's always a pleasure to teach with Steven. But today I'm really looking forward, Boudewijn, to interact with you and to see how academia and practice can help each other, where we can learn from you in practice, and hopefully where we can also support you in addressing your challenges. And together we were discussing the topic of today, and I'm really happy with our title. We found out that what we have to do as strategic leaders is really managing complexity, thriving in these challenging times. And that requires us to walk a tightrope, to be an equilibrist, walking on multiple things, addressing multiple challenges, seeing multiple ideas, and then integrating them and acting upon these things. Hence the title, Putting Strategic Thinking into Action. So we prepared a couple of slides, and if we will go through these slides, maybe they will inspire you, maybe you will reflect on some of these things, and we will interact on these topics together with Boudewijn, and obviously with all of you who joined us today. By now we are with 91, so it's quite an intense crowd. It's really challenging for us and really heartwarming to welcome you all. So what have we prepared for you? So first thing, the idea is that as a strategic leader, surely you refer to strategy. But often we hear from our students, and also when we apply this in practice, question, what is strategy actually? So all organizations have the same challenge of trying to pursue a purpose of some sort. We have an intent with our organization. We try to do something with that. But at the same time, we are being confronted with having only access to a scarce amount of resources. Our resources for all of us are only allotted to us in a limited amount. It is not just for the public sector. It also holds for non-public sector organizations, private organizations. I'm pretty sure that also Brouwerij Haagt faces a challenge in identifying where these scarce resources are and allocating them in the most optimal way to that purpose that we defined for ourselves. At the same time, our strategy not only serves to allocate these scarce resources to that purpose, but it also needs to mobilize our people. It needs to provide them with energy. It needs to incentivize them, provide them with a sense of purpose. It's not just having an explicit purpose on itself that is enough. You also need to sense that purpose. Allowing you as an individual contributor to an organization or to a movement that you're starting to generate that energy every day and try to address the challenges that you face, as we referred. Now, in addressing a strategy and the challenges that we all have to address, the thing is that many organizations translate strategy quite soon into a list of actions. And there is quite some substantial literature on the idea that just that list of actions is not a strategy. It is just a list of things to do. So strategy and objectives are not enough. They are a key ingredient. I will refer to that later, but they are not enough. And the question is, what is then strategy? Can you please define strategy for us? And our fields and the group of people that we work with in Antwerp Management School, we have a very particular definition of strategy, and it fits very well the combination of the strategic management field and the leadership field, as you will see in a second. We define strategy as an explicit but also shared mental model for judgment and decision-making in organizations that refers to or describes how the organization will be successful. So the beautiful thing of your strategy is that you can describe, make explicit what your ideal way of working would be. You think about the future, you think about how to position yourself, how to make sure that you can address all these needs in the market that you are orientating for. But at the same time, you use that reference as a platform to judge, to see whether things are okay or not okay, to make decisions. Hence comes in the idea of focusing and saying what to do or not to do. But the key challenge that many organizations face is that their strategy often is not shared or not explicit. So the beginning of our definition, seeing strategy as an explicit and shared mental model, is quite important to us. What do we as a team see as that ideal description of our future? But we need to make sure that it is shared, because if we as leaders all act in different directions, surely the organization will not have all noses in the same direction. We will not be successful in allocating these scarce resources to pursue that purpose. And so that is how we define strategy here at Antwerp Management School. And it works quite successfully. And I will show you how that then also serves us to see how we can translate strategic thinking into action. And for that, we use a very simple model. We often call it a standard model. And it can be applied to many different settings. Whether you are the CEO of an interesting brewery with beautiful products to serve multiple target customers, or whether you are a leader within a team, or even a leader of an ecosystem of people who are not explicitly linked with each other, not even legally binded with each other, but are all willing to contribute to a shared purpose. You can apply this standard model or this very simple model of strategic management to all of these settings. The thing is there that we all try to address a certain value, and that refers to that purpose that we want to achieve. We have a purpose and there is value in achieving that purpose. We can even translate that on a more conceptual level, even as a philosophical level, that value can be translated into well-being, even personal well-being, because achieving your value, achieving that purpose of your organization, it brings you in a state of flow. It gives you that spark of having a very good feeling of positioning yourself within this world. The question is, how can we drive value on a consistent basis? Key thing is, I will only be successful over time if we exert continuous effort. And sometimes I tell it to my students. I also apply this to my kids at home, my two girls. And then I say, hey, how do you want to be successful in life if you do not put effort in things? Things in life don't come by themselves on a systemic basis. So effort is quite important into organizations. The way we express effort is through actions or projects or initiatives and through processes. These two dimensions, they will inspire the effort in your organization. Now, if I said that strategy also serves that mobilizing and energy element, then motivation comes into play. Because how can we systemically realize effort to drive value? It's only through a focus on motivation. Extrinsic motivation, but also intrinsic motivation. Now, surely you would say that Geert and Steven and even Boudewijn probably motivation, driving effort, driving value. I see that, but it's too simple. And there is one extra variable that we put in between motivation and effort, and it's obviously that reference to resources and capabilities. We need to allocate and smartly allocate our scarce resources and capabilities, as well as provide direction. As I said, say as an organization what you will do and what you want to. Keep that focus. Make sure that you define for your customers, for your employees, for your stakeholders at large, what your direction is, how you will position yourself, what is it that makes you valuable in this organization. You need to provide that direction. And as a whole, we express these multiple elements as the key components of our standard model. If you as a strategic leader drive motivation, allocate resources and capabilities, observe effort, and give direction to your people, your performance will be there, the success will be there, and even that will lead to personal well-being. And surely there are multiple components to it. And what we want to do now is to help you to dive into these multiple components and comprehensively see how you can translate strategic thinking into action. And it entails all of these elements. It's not just one element, hence my reference to just that list of actions or just the roadmap that you define for yourself. And talking about that roadmap, I think it's important to note that in addressing complexity, in addressing that dynamic world around us, you should see strategy more than just as a simple puzzle. Because if you look at organizations being in strategic dialogue, we often tend to see things as, oh, I need to resolve this puzzle. There is a conundrum and there is just one solution for that. That's not the case. Often your strategy, and that is what we know, involves making trade-offs, making choices. And all of these choices are on an optimal solution line, but we need to make these choices. So it's not just one solution, but multiple solutions. And things are even more complicated than that. Because what we see that organizations, and surely these days also, often face dilemmas. And so strategic thinking is also about addressing these dilemmas, making choices, not in multiple solutions, which are optimal, but in making a choice between A and B, between the one or the other, and daring to make these choices. And to complement this, and by the way, we're building here on one of our very nice colleagues, Ron Meijer, who works with us in the faculty here at Antwerp Management School, working on strategic management. The final component, the final characteristics of strategy is also that strategy can be paradoxal, that there are multiple reconciliations that we need to do innovatively. And I will not zoom in too much on that because I know my colleague, Steven, will build on this idea in also addressing the leadership element in strategic thinking. But these paradoxes are quite important. So please note that strategy is not just solving puzzles, not just addressing these trade-offs, but also identifying dilemmas that you face and daring to make choices. And at the same time, knowing that there are multiple paradoxes, making these paradoxes explicit and trying to thrive in these paradoxal settings. So that's one thing. And maybe I should now pass on the word to Steven. Please go.
Thank you, Geert. Indeed, Geert has mentioned several times leaders need to be capable of making decisions in the view of dilemmas. And I think we all have been at some point in time in a dilemma where we have to make terrible choices between things that you can't really choose between because they're all important. So I try to map here in this graph what I would call business imperatives that we all strive for and that are difficult to optimize or to prioritize. So of course, every company needs to be performance and market oriented. We have to keep our client in mind and we want to safeguard the bottom line. At the same time, we want to build a well-oiled machine. And so operational excellence is important. We have to try to build an organization that is well structured, well organized, streamlined with good processes, because a big part of how we make money is by optimizing those processes and reducing costs. At the same time, we need to stay ahead of the curve at any point in time, at least in terms of image, but ideally also in terms of having unique products and services. So coming up with innovation is also an imperative that most companies want to have in the back of their minds. And even if the strategic choice is to be more of a cost-efficient, high-quality, low-price strategy, still we can be innovative in terms of improving the processes that we use to be more cost-efficient. So even for this type of focus, innovation is important. Then there is the business imperative that has pervaded our business world of sustainability. We can no longer simply ignore the impact that we have on our planet. Our children and the next generations will simply not agree with that. So we have to also work that into our mix. And to make it even more complex, of course, we cannot achieve anything. Geert also referred to that in the beginning, if we don't have the sparkle, the motivation, right, the enthusiasm. So we need also internal trust and support of people working together in function of a common purpose. So I don't think anyone would, question the importance of these different imperatives. Now you can pair them up one by one and see them as dilemmas. But of course, it's much more productive if you see them as paradoxes. Now, maybe it's interesting to dive a bit deeper. And for those of you who are interested, I've produced a white paper describing all those different paradoxes if you want to dive deeper. Of course, we also go deeper into these paradoxes in the program of business strategy and leadership. So if we look at the next slide, and I think we can find a few examples. I'm going to take them out of specific paradoxes that you might be already familiar with. One of them actually received an own name. It's called organizational ambidexterity. And it's the tension between operational excellence and exploration and innovation. Why is there a strong tension between them? Because they really have a very different focus. And if we look at the underlying human characteristics, we all have this paradox inside of us, right? You could sort of boil it down to being more prudent on the left-hand side, making sure that we don't make too much mistakes, that everything is nicely streamlined, or to be curious and outgoing and adventurous on the right-hand side, to make sure that we discover new ways of doing things. Even if we are in a well-established production process, there's always tinkering that we can do in the process and continuous improvement. And therefore we need curiosity. And so we all have these two forces inside of us. It's a paradox because they fight with each other. If you want to dig deeper, you can go to the neuroscience behind it. And that's also what we do when we dive a bit deeper. So the neuroscience behind it is on the left-hand side, we have the behavioral inhibition system, which is built inside of our brain and our whole nervous network. And it basically is driven by what we call a negativity bias. We want to make sure we don't make any mistakes because those mistakes can have huge consequences. But on the other hand, we also have circuitries in the brain, specifically around the reward centers of the brain, that push us to go out and find new ways of doing things, because if we have new things, if we found a niche in terms of strategy, we don't have to fight. We are not in a red ocean. We can come into a blue ocean, where the benefits are much easier to be reaped. So this is an example of an organizational paradox. If we go to another one, the next slide, we see another one I'm really very interested in, also from the chair I'm leading, which is the chair of high performance organizations, which is, of course, we want to look for the best performance, and this performance requires that we put pressure on people, that we are demanding, and that we require the best and the highest quality, so we get the best results. But we all know that there's a limit to that. And top sporters, top athletes understand very well these limitations. The biggest enemy of sustained high performance in time is pushing your limits and sometimes maybe stepping over the limits, and as a consequence, affecting negatively the well-being of our employees. So we have to take into account both forces. We cannot choose between one and the other. And so this is where paradoxical thinking comes in. So in order to really understand what a paradox is, maybe we can find some inspiration in the following slides.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephen. I said, because what you refer to, that focus, and focus not just in organizations, but also for people, and these inherent characteristics. And at the same time, the strive for well-being or value. So that refers to also our key intent. It's what we see in strategic management. To translate strategic thinking into action is that it is so important to have clarity on the intent of your strategy. And yeah, sure, there are some very well-known gurus in our field, and Michael Porter is one of them. And we should be, critical towards our gurus, but at the same time, we could also build on their ideas and stand on their shoulders. And so that's what we've done recently. We've been thinking about, can't we characterize the strategic transformation that organizations are intending to? Because if that focus is not there, if that clarity is not there, it creates more ambiguity and more frustration in terms of not just the customers, not just the partners or stakeholders, but also individuals, and it even has a negative impact on well-being. So we try to identify multiple options to describe the transformation path that we could work on. And if you look at the graph, you can see that many organizations might have a status now, the status quo, where you identify for yourself, maybe there is progress to be made, and that's good. So organizations are driven by seeing opportunities, seeing those challenges, maybe also pushed by the threats and the competitive powers that face them. But then there is things to do. And the question is, what can we do? Moving from the status quo to a new industry standard that has been set or defined recently is one option. It's option number one on my graph here also. Might be very well be that you make different choices, that you make that move and you try to do both of these things, focus on the cost on one hand side, focus on experience on the other hand side. And I think it's important to note here, it's not just customer experience, but it's also employee experience here, or stakeholder experience, to put it more generally. You can move more in the direction of your experience, or you can move more in the direction of low cost. Option number one is an interesting one, because due to technology these days, we have an opportunity to combine these things, where Michael Porter said, no, you have to choose between one or the other, otherwise you are stuck in the middle. Nowadays, thanks to technology, we can achieve also option number one. So that's why we refer to it as the first one. But it still is strengthening the trajectory on your existing path. There is a third option, and that refers to trying to achieve a breakthrough, even pushing the boundaries more extremely. And what we should do there is to reimagine the critical success factors that you've been working on, referring to your current paradigms or your current convictions, maybe even the industry convictions, and then trying to come up with a new paradigm. trying to find yourself a new position, but that is still within the existing space. You will still remain within the current known industry. Obviously, that brings us to another option, option number 4 here on my graph, or a third trajectory, as identifying that new space. And that is where Stephen referred to that blue ocean. It's clearly a blue ocean in point number 4. It might also be a blue ocean in point number 3. And there, in that option number 4, you build yourself a newly reinvented position. And it can very well focus on multiple things at the same time, as I said. So that is how you try to translate strategic thinking into action. Now, having had that clarity on your intent, on the effect of your strategy, surely translating your strategy into your value just with that clarity will not be enough. We need to build a system. It's what we call integrated strategy management. We need to make a system in order to bring along the organization. And if we describe our organization, we often refer to one of my older fields that I really loved to work on, and that's management control. And the term control might impact you, and you say, I don't like the element of control. It's not about to control in order to check on people. It's about control in order to give direction to organization, to steer organization in a positive way. That's how you need to interpret this term. But in management control, we've learned to identify different levers that can bring strategy into action, that can translate strategy into value. And those levers are multiple. So first, you have organizational structure. Because if you have a new strategy and you don't redesign organizational structure, or you do not look at the implications of your new strategy on your structure, you might very well learn that your new ingredients or even your new recipes will just lead to old style of product. So structural components are very important. Next to that, it's your boundaries. You will have to set boundaries. I referred in our introduction to complexity. Steven builds on that when he refers to the paradoxical elements and the dilemmas that we face. So setting boundaries is so important. You can choose for yourself what to do. And by the way, one key element of boundaries is not just policies, but also strategy. Strategy on itself can be seen as a boundary system. Not just only to limit yourself, but it might also help you to build a new paradigm where you see boundaries as a space for safe creativity. Third element is culture. Bringing along your organization, installing new routines, installing new ways of working with each other, but making that explicit and working with your people on what your new type of culture could be like. Traditionally, we know that setting objectives, following up on targets, but also defining projects and seeing whether or not we meet our deadlines or milestones even in between, and deliver on scope and on time is important. So that is what the element is of diagnostic control, and it will remain important for the future. But you need to tune your organization in terms of the strategy that you have defined and see how that helps you to create value. Finally, and that is a key one, is that organizations are not hermetically closed. They are not neutral. I refer to the individual elements and the human elements in strategic management, which are so important and which we in business strategy and leadership focus on quite intensively. So that is the element of interactive control, learning from doing, interacting with each other and interacting with your customers, interacting with members of your ecosystem and with multiple other ecosystems to translate that to your organization into your ecosystem is quite important. That's what we call interactive control, not being closed, not being limited, but being open and observing and use the contextual information also to redefine your own standards. And what we do in integrated strategy management, we take up our strategy, we translate into that organizational system or your management control system. And you see it here visually also depicted. We tune the organization and we keep tuning it. It's sometimes like an equalizer system that you really fine tune in order to deliver most optimal outcomes there. And that is, I think, another key element that we need to have in our toolbox in order to translate strategic thinking into action. So what I've referred to already are 3 simple rules, and we've learned that to address complexity, we need to not make things even more complicated, but we need to simplify things. And so 3 simple rules. So if I may give you some advice, and by the way, I will also ask Boudewijn later on to give some advice based on his career and the way he addresses some of the challenges to you. But my simple rules that I want to give to you as a means to support you in addressing your challenges are these 3 things. So first, most things in life are not simple puzzles. Please do learn to live with multiple types of tensions. And those are often also these dilemmas in paradoxes, as Stephen said. Second element is try to be as clear as possible, relentlessly clear and focus on your intent. And thirdly, try to coordinate your effort through a consistent and coherent system of these organizational levers, and know that you have to tune them at all times. I've been raised in a setting where we said love is a verb. And actually, I teach my students that strategy is also a verb. It is doing something with it. And in Dutch, we don't have that. But in English, the beautiful language of Shakespeare helps us, because to strategize is actually a verb. Stephen.
All right, so now the question you probably all have is, what does that mean for me, right? Here attending this webinar, what does it mean? How am I supposed to act as a leader? And I think here gave you a lot of different hints already, right? Is leadership about creating that structure, setting those boundaries, cultivating that culture, exerting that diagnostic control, or to learn from doing through interactive control? Certainly, that will be elements that a leader is doing. But coming back to those dilemmas, those tensions, right? Leadership is also about living with the ambiguity that these tensions bring along, and very often manage the anxiety and the hypervigilance that ensue from that, because not everybody can live with these ambiguities and with these tensions. It's also about almost becoming a manager of tensions in other people. And why is that? Because the brain likes predictability. The brain doesn't like ambiguity. The brain much rather thinks black or white, or you're on my side or on this side. The strategy is this or that. That's much easier. Right? And so in the book, The Paradoxes of Leadership, where I reflected on what is leadership in this now world of uncertainty, and this VUCA world, in this very complex and hyper interconnected world, what does leadership mean there? Right? And you might recognize the symbol of yin and yang. And I think we can find a lot of inspiration in this symbol, because in Taoism, actually the coexistence of 2 forces that are not just contradictory, but actually complementary, gives us a lot of inspiration of how maybe we can approach those paradoxes. And the suggestion is typically, or maybe the answer is not one or the other. It is actually the integration of one and the other. Paradoxical thinking is and thinking. It's not one or the other, it's and thinking. Paradoxical decision making is saying, hey, I have 2 options here, option 1 and option 2. Dilemma thinking means I get stuck, because if I choose one, I will sub-optimize things that come along with the second. Paradoxical decision making is, I want to take the best of option 1, I take the best of option 2, and I'm going to look for option 3. I don't settle for second best. I want the best. And we look for an option, the third option, that's maybe a bit out of the box, to look for the best way to combine those two things. Now, what we have also learned about paradoxical leadership is it requires a certain level of vertical, what we call vertical cognitive development. We've learned now that adults continue to learn in the course of their adulthood. It doesn't stop when you become an adult. And we become more and more complex. And so one of those stages of complexity is where you learn to live with ambiguity and learn to think in terms of dialectics. There's a thesis, there's an antithesis, and there's a synthesis, right? That's also what's behind this paradoxical thinking. And so that's something we do. We dive deep into all those different paradoxes and how it translates into leadership in the program of business strategy and leadership. In order for you to understand the paradoxes, to recognize them, because they're everywhere. My students always complain that after having classes with me, they start recognizing and seeing paradoxes everywhere because they are everywhere, right? But more than anything, to leverage and to navigate those paradoxes. That's the big challenge. Now, let me give you just one example, but one of the many. One paradox, which is on the next slide, that I want to confront you with. So here you see, a typical team working together, the way they work together nowadays, right, around technology. And one of the paradoxes that leaders have to deal with is, and now I really translate it on the level of behavior, right, which is on the one hand, on the left-hand side, we have task orientation. And on the other side, we have relation orientation. Okay, as a leader, should I be focused on solving problems, collecting data to solve the problems, analyze the problems, decision-making, problem-solving? Is that really what leadership is about? Because if I'm completely focused on that and I ignore the other side, which is relationship building, focusing on people, not just what they do, but how they do it and improve those processes as well. But the final objective of developing trust, because if people trust each other, the collaboration is much, much better. And so that means I'm not just focused on actions, I'm also focused on emotions and how people work together. Now, this is a very good example of a paradox, because if we look at the next slide, we have now studies that show that behind those two types of behavior, action-oriented or task-oriented versus emotion-oriented or relation-oriented, there are antagonistic neural networks. What does that mean? These are two networks that need to be activated that literally cannot be activated simultaneously. It is biologically impossible. So what have we learned now over time in observing leaders in action in the neurotraining lab? Also part and parcel, if you do the program on strategy and business leadership, is where we observe leaders in action. And so if you cannot activate both at the same time, what do great leaders do? They switch back and forth. So it's a type of situational leadership, but a very particular type of situational leadership, because you have to adapt and change and switch back and forth between different styles in the same situation with the same person. And this is why this is so challenging. This is why leaders, from this point of view, from a neuroscience point of view, need to be mentally very flexible. The capability of containing ambiguity and consider both options at the same time. That's not evidence, that's not simple, that's something that needs to be developed. So, without further ado, I turn it back to you, Geert, with a great quote that summarizes everything.
Thank you very much, Stephen. A nice build-up there. Yeah, indeed. We wanted to inspire you in order to help you also translate strategic thinking into action. And while preparing for this webinar, yeah, I've came across this quote from Walt Disney, and it states here that we around here, and it's good, it translates to us as an organization. He says, we don't look backwards for very long, but they do, shortly. But we don't look backwards for very long. We keep moving forward, Walt Disney said. We keep opening new doors, doing new things, because we are curious. And curiosity keeps us leading down new paths. And I really liked this quote. Now, this brings also us here in this webinar to open up a new path. And that allows me to also introduce, actually, I will ask him to introduce himself, also our third protagonist here in this webinar, Boudewijn van der Kele. Boudewijn, could you please introduce yourself? And then we have some questions for you.
Yes, sorry for my poor English. I have to practice, and it's a good good time to do that. Mostly I can speak English very good when I drank 2-3 beers, but no, I can't start with that. I'm drinking just water. So sorry for that. I will do my best, and it's for me a good practice. It is also my first webinar, so it's a big challenge for me. So I'm at Brewery Haagt, and Haagt Brewery, we are 100% a Belgian family-run brewery, independent. It's my grandfather who started in 1989. We are a state-of-the-art brewery, and we are the third lager and specialty brewer in Belgian market, mostly on the HoReCa market. We had a turnover of 100 million in 2019, but Corona came, and 2020 and 21 were very impacted by Corona. So we are with 500 employees. Most of them work in Belgium. Kind of 15 people in France, 6 people in Netherlands, 6 people in Canada, in Quebec. 2 people, new people in UK, and 1 new colleague in Spain, in Madrid. So we are very focused for many years on the HoReCa market, but with Corona, we did also retail and exports, but at a lower level. And when Corona came, we saw that we had to change our strategy and to reinforce our retail and export retail, export HoReCa also. Voilà.
Few words on yourself, maybe, Boudewijn.
Thank you. I'm 28 years at the brewery. Previous on my CEO, I'm CEO since November 2020. So we are 16 months CEO at the brewery. So it's still a big challenge, but I liked challenges. So my ambition for Haagt Brewery is safeguard the authenticity of the company by continuing and growing the success of the company with a new vision and strategy. It's also a family business, so that's my challenge, to keep it in the family. We create brands that people love, to identify with and act customer centric. We build a culture that makes Haagt Brewery an employer of choice, We're turning Haag Brewery into a sustainable company, and we are leading Haag Brewery into the digital age. It's very important either. My personal ambition, being an inspiring leader, I know have a lot of to learn. So I do my best to try that, and confirming myself as the next generation CEO. That's also a big challenge. I have a family of I have 3 children, a beautiful wife. I sports, running, biking, swimming, tennis. I try to have a healthy life, and I'm quite sensitive for nature. So I'm ready for the questions.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here, Boudewijn. And the way you introduced the organization, the way you also refer to your ambitions as a leader, and even your personal ambitions as a human being, I think they quite fit the topic of today. And maybe the first question builds on that topic of today, if I may, and maybe a very big question. So you address it as you wish, Boudewijn. But since it is translating strategic vision into action, could you maybe share with us some of the interesting challenges that you faced, maybe throughout your career or quite recently when redefining your strategy? What comes to term in translating strategy into action?
First of all, I started with analyzing the situation, the actuals, the evolution, the trends in the markets, because exports countries were also part of the scope. We looked what we have today. We did a SWOT analysis. It's quite simple, but you have to do it. And then I started to dream. What do I believe? What do we believe with the management? What do the employees believe? And we check that also with the trends. That's very important, because my dream is maybe not the same as the trends, and that's, if you have a good dream, if you check it with the trends and you are a good dream by that, I believe it will be a very strong, you can build a very strong strategy. So we define a new vision, a mission, and we wrote then the strategy. We discovered actually that our place on the S-curve, I think everybody knows what the S-curve means. Maybe Geert, you want to explain it, but otherwise I go further.
Yeah, probably refer to the way markets evolve, products evolve in that market, maybe even how customers also can observe the performance of the products that we provide to these, or services to these markets. And they typically move like an S-curve, like there's a slow take-up, then there is a growth phase with accelerated growth, but that growth declines, and at the end you see a maturing phase. But surely you are being confronted with, hey, how are we going to address this? That's probably what you referred to.
Yeah, and we are coming there. We are now at the maturing in some markets and some segments of the market. We wrote a kind of new S-curve, and or we think the beginning of a new S-curve. So at the top of the actual curve, you have to jump to the other curve, and you have the leap of faith. We have to encourage our people to feel safe to jump, because their innovation kind kind of digitalization, ERP, CRM, and so on, and employees are afraid of this great step. So because of the complexity of it, we started with a workshop now recently to inspire the employees' engagement. So as the management team, it starts there, has to know how to keep with that. So that's the steps we made.
Interesting, Boudewijn. Thank you very much. Yeah, that S-curve is an interesting one, and also what you relate to when you refer to that leap of faith, and you need to make that jump. You need to jump from one mature stage to hopefully another take up of a new era. And that encouraging of people is quite impressive. We, from a strategic management perspective, we often refer to it as, yeah, these S-curves, we should be able to surf on them, really see them as waves, and then metaphorically look at how you as an organization with your products and services, with your capabilities can surf on these waves. So the fit between what you do as an organization and the context that you operate in is so important. But indeed, if you are in a mature phase, that leap of faith is quite impressive. Pretty sure that Stephen also has some reflections on that.
Yes, but what I found very interesting in Boudewijn's reflections is you almost see the paradoxes shimmering through, right? Between the dreams on the one hand side, right, and the trends on the other hand, the facts and the figures on one hand, and the intuition and also the experience that can translate into insights to try out new things. The other thing I found very interesting is to create this safety, this psychological safety. We also found in our research that in order to have people take initiative, that's one of those dilemmas as well. If we do a lot of controlling, where Geert was referring to, people might be afraid to take initiative. And that's important in this innovative culture. So safety becomes a very important aspect. So Boudewijn, I was curious, how do you create this safety for people to jump? Because that's quite challenging.
Yes, a good question. It was for us important to I said before by the first question that we are following a workshop for management to get inspiration and to inspire or to reassure our employees. But that's not enough. I know. You have to get the middle.
The means,
yeah.
Resources and capabilities.
The resources, but the resources. So we invest in our new we invest in a new HR policy, in a change coach. Because and they will follow the people by the new projects. We work on it, so we help them jump to the other S-curve.
Great. And so providing support and not taking that for granted, because I think we sometimes take that for granted. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but we had other paradoxes or dilemmas, and maybe I can mention some of them, and Stephen, you can explain maybe to the audience the difference then to the paradox and dilemmas. But we are well, first of all, a HoReCa brewery, and Corona was a big challenge for us. More than 80% of our sales fell down at that moment. but as a Horeca brewery, we focused also on premium lager. But there is a problem. Premium lager, this type of beer, is in decline since more than 20 years, maybe 30. VS specialty beers. But it still represents 60% of the Belgian beer market. So now, and when a new cafe or brasserie started, he collaborates with a brewery for premium beers because it's the biggest volume. So Pils or premium lager is declining, but we launched today a new beer, a new premium lager, the Super 8 Pils, what you see here. It's important for us because the consumer expects innovations in the beer market, and we have a good reputation of strong capabilities in innovating delicious beers, and so we make a difference. It's not only a premium lager like Primus, Stella, Jupiler, but it is bio and gluten-free. So we make there the difference because we think the consumer wants different in the market. But it's a big challenge because the segment of premium lagers is going down year after year.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, absolutely. Stefan, maybe you want to build on that.
Well, yes, the brain as something is also paradoxical in the sense that at the same time it wants safety, it wants predictability, so it tends to cling on to the familiar, and this is why sometimes people resist change, because what's familiar, what's predictable, what's familiar, it also creates safety. But on the other hand, if you want to surprise a brain, call its attention, right? Startle it, arouse it, so it actually gets excited. You have to come up with something new, right? So this seems like a typical paradox, a direct contradiction. You know, what is it then? So I think it's a question what we've learned over time, that in human beings, they like to start from the familiar, not to break away too much from the familiar, but little by little, in baby steps, start introducing something new. Right, so it's neither or and it's and. It's building on something that's familiar, like a brand that's recognizable, and this is why people appreciate brands. This is why we build brands in the first place, because we recognize the brands. It's something we're familiar with, but the brand comes up with a new product or a new service, and so this is where we integrate the paradox, where we find a good balance between the two of them. Does that make sense?
I think so.
It does. And what strikes me, it's interesting that we even extend to the marketing domain, by the way, because actually that's what marketeers have been doing, coming up with new products. But there is a paradox in that too, and we address this paradox. So strategy, leadership, and marketing, it all comes together. Yeah, very good. Now, by the way, and maybe this also builds on what Stephen and you said previously, and I introduced that concept of whether we are just optimizing where we are, redefining the critical success factors, or that we really try to redefine our position there, that new space. Question is, what is it that you're trying to do, or strengthening the existing path, reimagining these critical success factors, or reinvesting your business? And what is your intent, and how do you communicate that to your people and your other stakeholders?
For us, at this moment is the second one. Our journey is reimagining the critical success factors, but we look forward and prepare us for the long term. To reinventing our business. So we hope so, but it's important, I think, to at some time to look forward, to look much further than you can see. So we do both. Started by the actual business and to look critical at it and to try to do it better.
And there you have it, by the way. Eh? You use the word and, not or, but the word and.
Yeah.
You make sure that you try to extend your position right now, redesign your critical success factor, but at the same time, look at your future, try to reinvent your business also. And I know you have interesting ideas on that. So yeah, just by sharing those ideas, working on those ideas and within the organization, giving probably also that spark, Stephen, that builds momentum on really creating that new future. The future doesn't come by itself. You have to create your future. We call it path dependency. And so, yeah, that path, you can already think about it. By the way, cynists will say, oh yeah, we've been talking about this and now we do it. That's not new. But yeah, you really define something new there. Yeah, you really help the organization make another step change. And that is maybe also how we should look at organizations. We've been thinking so often, and many organizations still do that it is a finite game. We need to play a game and then there is the end of time. By the way, this is a concept again popularized by Simon Sinek, the idea of a mission being a finite game. But no, organizations hopefully can be infinite, and our game is infinite to play. And so question is not we have to fight against each other, there is time and then we all go home. No, we need to continuously work on things. And so we also have to explain to our people, I think, because sometimes people are tired because they expect a timeout or they expect the end of the game. And sorry for that, the end of the game hopefully will not come.
So, Wouter, I'm also curious. One of the things we know from research, but you have the practical experience, is there's work of Mary Ulbeen, and she actually looked at ambidextrous organizations that are capable of finding and maintaining this balance between continue to have the best possible operational excellence to do what we have been doing, but always a little bit better, and at the same time to be innovative. And very often what happens in organizations that these two forces become polarized people. They become polarized in departments. So we have basically operations and quality control are mostly focused on excellence and sort of to keep the machine running and make it run better. And we have people maybe in new business development and R&D who are more focused on the exploration side and innovation. So how do you avoid your company becomes polarized between those who want to stay with the familiar and those who want to advance? How do you go about doing that? How do you keep the balance between those two important forces?
We start with conversation, meetings, discussions, a lot of interaction with different people to learn what they struggle with. We did a wealthy scan, and I speak personally to my employees. We call it between muck and pint. So it's very important to let them tell. That's a kind of frustration that maybe it's a first step when people has some frustration and some ideas and comments about some items, some subjects. So we struggle with a difficult culture switch and organizational silos. And I think it's a typical problem for traditional enterprises. The solutions for that, for me, it was to reinforce our HR department, as I said. We planned to give training, and we did a wealthy survey, as I said, to understand what the pain points were. And for the CEOs, we had to work more transversal. And so we had to change or write new process. That were the steps we took to solve these problems.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I think it's interesting, that element of conversation that builds on the interactive control aspect, but not just in a process, not just in typical workshops or meetings that we organize, standing committees that we have, but also in an individual conversation that you have as a leader with your people, or that a number of people have with you, and that you are open for it. By the way, I was thinking it builds on Otto Scharmer. Probably some of you might know Theory U, where Otto Scharmer explains what true profound listening is all about. Sometimes, before we can engage in profound listening, people sometimes have to download that. They have to express their frustration, as long as they know that they are doing that in order to come to that state of profound listening. And so we as leaders probably should not be afraid of that downloading and that expression of these frustrations. There's potentially a lot of information in that. I see Elin popping up there, so there must be questions from our audience.
Yes, you noticed my nudge.
I think it's a good point in time. Yeah, I've been reading also these questions, and I'm pretty sure that Sandrijn has an interesting question that builds on what we've been discussing now, and for sure Ivan, and also the person who is labeled as tech support. I will come back to that. Do you want to pose the question of Sandrijn, Elina?
Well, you have it open as well, but maybe, just Boudewijn, it's a question for you, indeed, from Sandrijn, who is a financial and operational director. And Sandrijn is wondering, Boudewijn, how you can avoid to end up with too many ideas, too many projects, wanting to tackle them all.
Interesting question, Boudewijn.
Yeah, that's what you explained. It's not so easy, and to make choice. You explain it at the beginning. What for me, it's important to make priorities. That's the basic on it, because when you start as CEO, you want to change a lot of things, and people want you to pursue you to change a lot of things, but you can't change everything. And so try to get all the things together, but to put priorities for the actual business. The problem we cope the last 2 years with the corona, and it was maybe much easier to take priorities at that moment, because I think then I don't say it was a choose for survive, but it's close to it, because you don't know where it stops. When everything is going well, I think it's maybe more difficult to get priorities.
Yeah, thank you for explaining, Boudewijn, and I think I can build on that. Remember my quote from Rummold, where I refer to the idea of just having actions is not a strategy, it's an action list. And maybe there we also have to stress that just having priorities is not a strategy. So it comes from strategy, you define your strategy, you have a comprehensive view on how you want to position yourself, building on your capabilities, but also being in sync with the context. But then you as an organization, you as a leader, you need to define priorities. And there is actually also a simplicity in that. Any priority that you set yourself that fits your strategy is good. But please don't forget to do so. You just need to set priorities, because that builds on that basic philosophical setting that I introduced in the beginning. All resources are scarce. None of us has an unlimited amount of resources available, but we need to set priorities. I'm not sure whether Steven wants to build on that too.
Yes, well, actually, what's interesting to know is that from a neuroscience point of view, prioritization is one of the most resource-intensive and demanding activities that exist. It's worse than calculating a third integral. I'm just using a metaphor, of course, right? Why is that? Because when you're prioritizing, you have to look at all the options. You have to hold all the criteria, right, to make choices. And you're constantly multitasking. You're switching back and forth between option 1 against criterion number 2, number 3, number 4, option number 2, comparing option 1 and 2 against criterion 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's a lot of complex thinking going on. And to hold that in time, you need to be well rested. You have to have good resources. You have to be serene and quiet. There's a lot of pressures because priorities means choosing and therefore losing. Somebody will be affected, impacted, may see this as a personal attack or insult, or being sidelined or being less important in the company. So prioritization also requires, that would be my recommendation, explaining the process. It's a gerundium, right? It's a gerund. Prioritizing, it's a process, it's a verb once again. And so in the way that what I want to rescue from what Boudewijn said before, the hard listening, going and engaging into a dialogue is exactly what is needed for people to understand where the priorities come from. Because the times where you would come down with the 10 commandments like Moses and just say, this is it, they are over. Right? People, if you want them to be engaged and take initiative and help the company, they need to understand the reasoning behind it. So that's also, I think, a very important insight that just came up here.
Very good. By the way, building on that, there is a question from tech support. But yeah, I need to refer to the person as tech support because I only have that. It's interesting. But it's interesting because he refers to the question, is there any cheat foods you can have that can help you to address that cognitive load and manage the difficult tasks like prioritizing, or like the person refers to multitasking. Steven, is there a quick fix here?
Wow. First of all, I think it starts with understanding that multitasking is resource intensive. And what it actually conceals is that we're switching back and forth between different options, different criteria constantly. Right? So what it requires actually is to have as little interruptions as possible, to have a work environment where people can work in a focused way, because every time you interrupt a logical process of prioritizing, you have to start all over again. There are the switching costs that are also present in that multitasking, and those switching costs can be so high that they actually take more time than actually doing the process of decision making in and of itself. And so focus is so important. And so this is why I think in modern organizations, you need workspaces where people can work in a focused way. In a way, this is not compatible with office spaces unless you have designed your workspaces in such a way that there are also meeting rooms where people can isolate themselves, work together in small teams, and work in an uninterrupted way. I think one of the good things that the pandemic brought along is that people became more conscious now of what type of jobs can I do from home, because maybe there it's more quiet and I can work in a more focused and concentrated way. And which jobs do I need to do on the job, in the company, in the building, because you have to interact with other people, and doing face-to-face interaction has better quality than to have it maybe online. So that's a positive thing that came with the pandemic, but I would say there is no real cheats. There are tricks that you can do, which is make sure you're well rested, that you have slept well, so you can focus, and condition your environment so that you can keep the focus.
Thank you very much. And I know you are personally quite into that, Boudewijn, by the way, also supported by indeed your lovely wife. So maybe that's kind of the secret ingredient over there. It's that knowledge, that awareness of these things.
Yes. When I was reading that Boudewijn is sensitive to nature, I could picture him walking through nature and finding this silence, finding this quietness. I think that's very, very important for great leaders to find those spaces so they can do some good and deep thinking.
It is.
There was also a question from Serge. Maybe Aline, you want to read it out, because I think this was an interesting one.
Thank you, by the way, for all your questions. I also see here that we have a question from Ivan Valev that we shouldn't forget, because he posed it all the way in the beginning. So maybe that's...
You are
we will...
Yeah.
No, maybe we can address Ivan's question first, and then we go to Serge's question. We also have one from Dave and from Khalid. So we will see. We only have 8 minutes left. How far along we get. But Ivan asks, and actually that was during your presentation here, says, how would you define new space as a new geo market or new vertical, or both?
And that's an interesting one. Thank you for, by the way, your statement or both was interesting. And it is these multiple dimensions. Talking about the new space is not just a product, it's not just a service, but it's not just a region, it's not just a way to go to market or a set of customers. It's a combination of these things. So you need to look at them comprehensively, I think. But the idea is there to really look for that uncontested space that you can position yourself in, building on your capabilities, and maybe they have not been tapped upon. We call them talents. And some of us might not even be aware of our talents. So identify these talents, think about these talents, think about what I refer to as that path dependency, defining your future by having these conversations, as also Boudewijn referred to. And I think then you can identify what might be an uncontested market space that I could position myself in, and it will always be multi-dimensional.
Thank you very much, Geert. And then maybe this one is for Steven. It's a question from Dave Klaes, project and a business process manager at Comscope. And he is wondering, like, how do you keep your team in that innovative mindset with the uncertainty that your team has been faced with COVID? We have talked about it a couple of times, or the word has fallen a couple of times. So he says, as creativity is most of the time is suppressed by uncertainty, worries, fear, how can you manage their motivation?
Yeah, well, it's not a simple thing, of course, but if you allow me to simplify it for the purposes of trying to explain it, is probably the first step is to get rid of the anxiety, the ambiguity, the uncertainty that's living in people. And so we find a lot of inspiration in the famous Aristotle project that was executed in Google. At a certain point in time, they understood how important teams are in order to create new ideas in the company. So they understood that an important capability for their firm was teamwork, and an important resource are the ideas that come from those teams. So after a lengthy research, they came to the conclusion that psychological safety is one of the key aspects, especially in an environment where you have a lot of nerds and geeks, where you have strange and quirky people. finds safety in being different and being slightly, on the edge, or as we say in good Flemish, met een hoek eraf. Those are good things. It makes us unique. It makes us different. So make people safe. That's the first step. There will not be creative ideas. There's a lot of research on that as well. Where good moods, being in a good mood and feeling safe is good for creativity. The second step, I think, is once you have taken care of that, and you can do this with instructions, for instance, when you organize a brainstorm, is to make clear that there are no stupid ideas. Actually, on the contrary, the craziest ideas are welcome, because one crazy idea can bounce off and trigger another idea that then turns out to be gold. So the second condition I would say is creativity needs a facilitator. It needs a process, a person that accompanies you and that guides you through the process, because naturally human groups and interaction have the tendency to be limiting. There's always one person who talks a bit louder, is more present. There are always a few people who talk a bit less, who are a bit more introverted or shy. So we need to have a process facilitator. That would be step number 3. Step number 2. Step number 3 is you also need rewards in place. It's a simple human thing. People will continue to behave in a certain way if they feel rewarded. And reward doesn't necessarily mean that people see that their ideas are being implemented and they get a money reward for that. Not at all, right? It's all about recognition, appreciation, saying thank you, giving people more opportunities when you see that they're really good at something, nourishing and recognizing their talents and giving people opportunities. That can also be extremely rewarding. When a person comes up with a new idea, maybe give them an opportunity to elaborate on that idea, present that idea in a more elaborated way, and give them recognition by giving them exposure to maybe different people that can appreciate as well this idea. So, sorry, I reduced something very complex into 3 steps, but maybe this gives you some structure at least.
Thank you very much, Steven, for making an effort to to bring a complex issue and downsize it a little bit into practical application. Geert, you also have seen the chat. We still have quite some questions. Actually, maybe one more that you say, this one we will still take.
Oh, I like the one, I can't read it. Yeah, Natasha. Maybe you can have a question from Natasha, the last one. And by the way, what we can do, we keep track of all the questions. We can send you feedback on all of the questions. And none of your questions will be lost here. What can we do? I hope I speak for the 3 of us.
Okay, so then indeed, Natasha's question is, for strategy, I like scenario thinking as a customer. Trends and our environment is unpredictable. So how do you take this into account, this unpredictability, and come to your strategy definition and related to that alternatives and not or?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Natasha. And indeed, scenario thinking is a very valuable one. By the way, it strikes me that it popped up due to the COVID crisis. It was long forgotten. Arie de Geus was working on that quite intensively, and it picked up in the 1980s, 1990s. Shell was a very big proponent of it, and Arie worked for Shell, and it surfaced right before COVID. It's a very interesting technique, not to predict. We always explain scenario thinking is not about predicting the future, but it allows you, I refer to the concept of your capabilities, to identify your capabilities that will allow you to thrive in the future. And what we do typically in scenario thinking is that we bundle multiple variables together to describe a kind of grid of potential outcomes, and we integrate these variables, and that in itself, so by design, is and thinking. It's not or thinking. So we don't have to choose in our scenarios. We just identify these scenarios, and they allow us to have that conversation that Boudewijn talked about, to maybe also, what Steven referred to, remove the fear for change, that anxiety that might live in organizations, just to picture the future and then translate these scenarios to our capabilities and our strengths today. So what are our talents? Maybe these talents that we still have to develop in order to address our future. So I'm a true believer of scenario thinking, but for these settings where you want to define your new future, and that ambiguity or that complexity is quite big. Sometimes we are in organizations where complexity and ambiguity is not that big. So then maybe there we should not necessarily introduce it. But many of us might face a setting like that, and then scenario thinking is quite interesting, and it builds on complexity thinking and paradoxical leadership, as we explained, I think.
Thank you so much, Geert. And we have hit 12:30, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. Leaves me to say thank you so much, both Geert, Steven, and of course Boudewijn, for your valuable insights, and everyone at home or at work that took the time to join us. Now, leaves me to say that should you want to know more about the topics that have been discussed, Geert and Steven already mentioned it, we have our masterclass, an 8-day program that will be organized again in the fall of 2022, November 2022, which goes much more into depth of what we have discussed today. So it's a program that offers you really strong frameworks on strategy, on high performance leadership, helping you, as Steven, I believe, put it, to navigate you through the paradoxes, through the ambiguity. So we combine those scientific insights and on how you can put them into action. So that's actually the perfect marriage between theory and practice. So that's it from my end. If this triggers you and you want to find out more about it, you want to have more information, feel free to reach out to me or Geert or Steven. But you will receive my contact details in the follow-up email of this webinar. So reach out, we can have a look at it together if it could be something for you. Also in the follow-up email, you will receive the recording of this webinar and the slide deck. So that's still coming your way. And then I would finish by saying, wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. Here in Belgium, it's a wonderful day, so enjoy it. And thanks again, Steven, Geert, Boudewijn, and everyone joining. Have a great day.